Here is what they don't put in the brochure. The bond doesn't feel like destiny. It doesn't feel like fate wrapping warm arms around your soul and whispering, finally, you're home. It doesn't smell like rain on roses or taste like the last page of a love story you've been reading your whole life. It feels like being struck by lightning, except the lightning is a 6'3" insufferable alpha with a jaw sharp enough to cut glass and the personality of a feral, overworked god who has never once in his entire existence been told no. My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 24 years old. I have a master's degree in environmental science, a nearly perfect record of avoiding alphas at social functions, and approximately zero interest in the ancient, biologically inconvenient phenomenon called the fated bond, or so I thought, until 37 minutes ago, when Caden Voss walked into my office, picked up my report without asking, and the entire universe decided, right then, right there, in the middle of my perfectly curated Tuesday, that he was mine. I'd like a refund. Please, full, no store credit. Part 1, the most inconvenient Tuesday of my life. The morning had started so well. I had coffee, real coffee, not the recycled office sludge that passed for caffeine in the break room, but the good stuff, the single origin Ethiopian roast I kept in a locked drawer because my colleagues were disasters. I had my noise-canceling headphones. I had 17 unopened emails, which, for a Tuesday at the Halcyon Institute of Ecological Research, was practically a vacation. I had, by all accounts, control of my life. Calloway. I didn't look up from my monitor. The voice was a visitor's, not a co-worker's, too composed, too deliberate, like someone who had spent years sharpening each syllable into something weaponized. We're closed, I said. The door was open, metaphorically closed, to people who walk in without knocking. A pause, then the distinct and deeply rude sound of someone picking something up from my desk. That made me look up. He was holding my quarterly emissions report, my 30-page, color-coded, footnoted dash within dash and dash inch dash of its life emissions report. The way someone holds a takeout menu, casually, like it was disposable. He was also objectively the most obnoxiously handsome person I had ever seen, which I noted only because it was factually relevant and in absolutely no way changed my immediate and complete dislike. Oh, F him. Tall, dark-haired, eyes the color of deep amber, like sunlight trapped in old glass, jaw carved by someone who was clearly overcompensating for something. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent. And he was reading my report like he was doing it a favor. This methodology is flawed, he said, conversationally, like commenting on whether. I blinked. Excuse me? Your carbon sequestration estimates in section 4. He turned a page. Didn't look at me. You're using 2019 baseline data. It's outdated. I'm aware of when the data is from. I cited the source, accounted for the variance, and adjusted the projections accordingly, which you would know if you'd read the footnotes. I stood up. Who are you? He finally looked at me. And that was when it happened. There is no clinical way to describe the fated bond initiating. The scientific literature tries pheromone cascade, limbic resonance, neurochemical synchronization, but none of it captures what it actually feels like. What it actually feels like is this. Someone reaches into the center of your chest and pulls a thread you didn't know was there. And the other end of that thread leads directly to the person in front of you. And suddenly the air between you is not empty anymore. It is full of something ancient and unreasonable and completely, catastrophically inconvenient. It smelled like cedar and cold winter air and something darker underneath, something I had no word for. The report slipped half an inch in his hands. His amber eyes went very still. He felt it too. Obviously. He felt it too, and the first thing he did, the very first thing, was school his expression back into calm neutrality and say, in a perfectly level voice, Caden Voss. Voss Energy Group. I stared at him. Voss Energy Group. one of the largest private energy conglomerates on the continent. The same Voss Energy Group, whose environmental compliance record I had been publicly dissecting in academic papers or 3 years, the same Caden Voss whose company had delayed 2 renewable transition projects last year due to, and I am quoting my own op-ed here, a staggering indifference to long-term ecological consequence. The universe had bonded me to the enemy. Get out of my office, I said. Part 2. The part where the universe laughs at me. He didn't get out of my office. He sat down in my chair. The guest chair, not my chair. But still, and set my report on the desk between us like a peace offering from a country that had no intention of making peace. We should discuss this, he said. There is nothing to discuss. You are a stranger who walked into my workspace uninvited, criticized my research, and triggered a biological event that I am currently choosing to ignore. Please leave. Something flickered in his expression, almost amusement. Almost, you can't ignore a fated bond. Miss Calloway, watch me. I've been watching you for 30 seconds and you've already gone pale. He was right, which was profoundly irritating. The bond, now that it had initiated, was not subtle. It was a low persistent hum in my blood, a warmth behind my sternum that had absolutely no respect for my personal autonomy. My Omega biology, which I had managed quite successfully for 24 years without bowing to alpha nonsense, had apparently decided that this was the hill it wanted to die on. I'm pale because I'm angry, I said. You're trembling, still angry. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and studied me with those infuriating amber eyes. Up close, the bond was worse. His scent was stronger, cedar and cold air and that dark undercurrent, and something in my hindbrain was doing cartwheels while the rest of me was filing a formal complaint. I didn't ask for this either, he said, and his voice was different. Less weaponized. Just quiet. Real. I looked at him properly for the first time. Not the suit, not the jaw, not the posture built for boardrooms. Just him. He looked tired, I realized. Not sleep-deprived tired, but the other kind. The kind that lives behind the eyes. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. I hated that I noticed. Fine, I said. You didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for it. So we agree, it's unwanted. We go our separate ways, we don't act on it, and the bond eventually doesn't work like that. I know how it works. Thank you, I have a biology degree. An ignored bond doesn't dissolve. It deteriorates. He held my gaze. Painfully. For both parties. The silence between us was loud. I sat back down. The bond hummed. I hated everything. Coffee, I said. Finally, he blinked for the first time. He looked genuinely caught off guard. Yes. Don't touch my report again. Part 3. What they don't tell you. They give you a pamphlet. When you present as Omega at 16, they give you an actual, physical pamphlet with a watercolor illustration of 2 people bathed in golden light, reaching for each other across some kind of meadow. The fated bond. A gift from nature, that was. The title, complete with the little trademark symbol. The pamphlet did not mention the following. 1. That your fated mate could be someone you fundamentally disagree with on a professional, political, and personal level. 2. That the bond does not care about consent, timing, context, or your carefully maintained policy of avoiding entanglement with alphas who have God complexes. 3. That ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It makes it worse, like a splinter, like a smoke alarm, like a song you hate that lives in your head and sets up furniture. 4. That even when he's being insufferable, even when he's sitting across from you in your office drinking your good Ethiopian roast like he owns the building and calmly explaining why your projecti ons are, quote, more conservative than necessary, even then, the bond makes you notice things. The way he wraps both hands around the mug. The slight loosening at his collar when he forgets to be performing. The way his voice drops half a register when he's saying something he actually means. I noticed all of these things and found all of them deeply unwelcome, You've been publishing papers against Voss Energy for years. He said. We were on our second coffee. It was past noon. Neither of us had moved. I've been publishing papers against practices that happen to belong to Voss Energy, I said. There's a distinction, it amounts to the same. It really doesn't. I pulled up a file on my monitor, spun it toward him. This is a model of projected coastal erosion over the next 40 years, if deep-sea extraction in the Meridian Basin continues at current rates. See that red zone? That's not a political position. That's math. He looked at the screen. Actually looked at it. I've seen this model, he said slowly. I know, my institute sent it to your board 18 months ago. Your legal team sent back a very pleasant letter explaining that the data was under review. His jaw tightened. The board makes those calls, not, you're on the board. Silence. Part 4. The part where I start to lose the argument with myself. He came back the next day. He didn't call ahead. He didn't knock any better than the first time. He did, however, bring coffee, the good kind, from the specialty roastery 2 blocks away that I had mentioned, in passing, while not paying attention to the fact that I was telling him things. He set it on my desk and sat down in the guest chair like he'd been doing it for years. You should come see the Meridian Project site, he said. I looked at the coffee. Then at him. Why? Because you've been modeling it from satellite data and second-hand reports. And because you're right that the current extraction approach has problems. I went very still. Say that again. You're right. He said it the way someone pulls a stuck door, with effort and relief once it's open. The board has been stonewalling the transition report because 3 of the senior partners have contracts that don't expire until 2027. They've been buying time. His eyes met mine. I've been fighting them internally for 8 months. I haven't been winning. Why are you telling me this? He looked at me for a long moment. The bond was warm and steady between us, like a low fire. Because, he said, you're the most credible voice in ecological research on this particular issue, and if I'm going to force the board's hand, I need someone they can't dismiss. You want to use my research? I want to work with your research with you. A pause. There's a difference. I stared at him. He looked back steadily. The pamphlet had definitely not covered this. Part 5. Meridian. The site was worse in person. I'd known it would be. Satellite imagery is clinical. It strips a place of its weight, makes destruction look like geometry. But standing on the coastal ridge above the Meridian Basin, watching the extraction rigs work through the pre-dawn haze, I could feel it the way you feel a headache building, slow, inevitable, total. The water was wrong. Not visibly polluted, not in any way a journalist could photograph and headline, but wrong in the way a landscape is wrong when you take something out of it that was meant to stay. The bird count was down. The kelp beds I'd mapped 3 years ago were retreating. The whole ecosystem was doing what ecosystems do when they're stressed, going quiet. Caden stood beside me. He'd been on the phone most of the drive up, and I'd been grateful for it. Because 2 hours in a car together with the bond humming and no task to focus on was 2 hours I hadn't fully prepared for. He wasn't on the phone now. He was just looking at the water. How long? I asked. He knew what I meant. At current rate, the kelp beds are gone in 7 years. The fish population collapses in 12. After that, he stopped. It doesn't stop at 12. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We stood there in the gray morning light. Below us, the rigs kept moving. I used to come here when I was a kid, he said. He didn't say it for my benefit. He said it like he'd forgotten to keep it to himself. My mother would take me tide pooling in the Southern Cove. She cared a lot about this place. A pause. She died when I was 19. I inherited my father's seat on the board at 22. I said nothing. The bond was very quiet, very present. I told myself I'd do it differently. He said from the inside. He laughed, once, short and without humor. You know how that goes. I know how it goes when people give up, I said. I don't know how it goes for people who don't. He looked at me, I looked back. This was the problem with the bond. Not the warmth, not the scent, not the low biological pull of it. The problem was that it made you see people, all the way through, past the armor, past the performance, past the version they've built to survive in the world. The bond doesn't care about surfaces, it goes straight to the person underneath. And the person underneath Caden Voss was someone who stood on a ridge above a dying coastline and looked like he had been trying, quietly and unsuccessfully, to save it for years. I really wished he'd been simpler. Part 6. The part where I stopped fighting the wrong thing. We drove back in the afternoon. I had a notebook full of observational data and he had 3 new voice memos and a message from his board's secretary that made his jaw do the thing, the tight, controlled thing, that I had started to learn meant he was absorbing something frustrating. Without reacting, "What did they say?" I asked. "The quarterly review meeting has been moved up 2 weeks. He set his phone face down on the console. "They're trying to push through the contract extension before I can build a countercase. Then we move faster." I looked at my notebook. "If I rework the model with the on-site observations, run it against the new extraction data you pulled, I can have an updated impact projection in 4 days. Real numbers, not estimates. Something they can't call conservative." He glanced at me. "That's fast." "I'm aware. Do you want to complain about it or do you want to win?" The corner of his mouth moved, just barely, almost a smile. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly, not a compliment designed for effect, just a thing he said like fact. The bond surged and settled. I looked out the passenger window at the passing hills and told myself the warmth in my chest was just the afternoon sun. I was not convincing. Part 7. The part that was going to happen eventually. It was 11 p.m. on day 3 of the data rebuild when he found me asleep at my desk. I know because I woke up to the smell of cedar and cold air and the gentle, distinctly careful weight of a jacket being draped over my shoulders. I didn't move immediately. I was still half asleep and the bond was doing its thing, that low contented hum, and the jacket smelled like him and it was very warm and I was very tired. "I can hear you thinking," I said into my arms. Sorry. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded amused and fond, and like he was trying not to be either. I sat up. He was perched on the edge of my desk, again, which he had apparently decided was communal property, and he had 2 paper bags from the late-night noodle place on 5th. "You haven't eaten," he said. "You haven't left. You said for days." "It's been 3. I thought." He stopped. "I thought you might need backup." I looked at him. In the blue light of my monitor and the yellow of the desk lamp. Without the suit jacket, it was over my shoulders, with his sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly out of order and a paper bag of takeout noodles in each hand. He looked human. Fully, completely, alarmingly human. "Caden," I said. "Sierra." He'd used my name. He almost never used my name. He called me Calloway like it was a title. "I'm still opposed to the entire concept of fated bonds," I said. "On principle. I want that on record noted. They're biologically autocratic and completely indifferent to personal choice, and the pamphlet is genuinely misleading." "I've never read the pamphlet." "You're not missing much." I took the noodles. "They have a meadow on the cover. Very unrealistic." "What would be realistic?" I considered. "An office." "Bad timing." "A significant professional conflict of interest." I pulled apart my chopsticks. "Someone eating noodles at 11 p.m. in a room full of emissions data." He smiled. Not the almost smile, not the controlled half movement. A real one. And it did something to his whole face, softened the lines of it, made him look younger, made him look like the boy who went tide pooling in the southern cove before the world got complicated. The bond settled into something different. Not urgent. Not the frantic lightning strike of the first moment. Something quieter and more sure, like a compass finding north. I hated it significantly less than I had for days ago. Eat your noodles, I said. I need a second pair of eyes on the thermal gradient analysis, and you're the only one who's actually been inside the extraction facility. Yes, ma'am, he said. And he moved his chair to my side of the desk, where the secondary monitor was, and he opened his noodles, and we worked. Part 8. The meeting room on the 42nd floor of Voss Energy Group smelled like expensive coffee and entrenched money and the particular atmosphere of men who had never once been told that what they wanted was not what the world needed. I had dressed carefully. Dark blazer, clean lines, the armor I put on when I needed to be taken seriously by people who would prefer not to take me seriously. I had my tablet, my updated model, and 3 printed copies of my revised impact report, bound and tabbed, because some arguments need to be physical, need to have weight. Caden walked in beside me. Not behind me, not in front, beside. 7 board members. Most of them older, most of them with the particular weariness of people who've been saying we'll deal with it later for so long that later has arrived and they're annoyed about the timing. I presented for 22 minutes. I did not use qualifiers. I did not soften projections to make them easier to hear. I showed them their coastline in 12 years and in 25, and I showed them the economic data, because at the end of every environmental argument is an economic one, and those are the arguments that reach people in rooms like this. I showed them what it would cost to ignore this. When I finished, Harlan Voss, Caden's uncle, senior partner, the man behind the contract extension, looked at me over his reading glasses and said, pleasantly, Ms. Calloway, this is all very compelling, but the Institute's findings have always been on the more dramatic end of the spectrum. I felt Caden tense beside me. I put my hand on the table, not on him, just near, and the bond registered it, and he steadied. Mr. Voss, I said in the same pleasant voice. The findings in this report were co-developed using Voss Energy's own internal site data, which your nephew provided. If you'd like to call my methodology dramatic, you'd also be calling your own data inaccurate. Which I'm happy to explore, though I suspect your legal team would prefer you didn't do that in a recorded meeting. Silence. Caden did not smile. But the line of his jaw shifted slightly. The vote, 2 hours and a great deal of procedural maneuvering later, came down to a draw. Which meant, per company charter, the deciding vote fell to the board chair. Caden stood up. He spoke for 11 minutes. Not to me, to them. About Meridian, about his mother, about what Voss Energy had been built on and what it was capable of being. About the contract extension and what it would cost in ways that didn't show up on a quarterly sheet. He spoke like someone who had been holding the words for a long time and had finally decided the weight of them was no longer worth carrying alone. The extension was voted down. The transition proposal moved forward. Part 9, after we stood outside on the pavement in the October air, and I was still running on adrenaline and cold coffee and 3 days of barely enough sleep, and Caden was standing with his hands in his pockets looking at the middle distance like the meeting was still happening somewhere inside him. You knew, I said. You knew about your mother when we were at Meridian. That's why you looked like that. Like what? Like it mattered. He looked at me. It does matter. I know. I tucked my tablet under my arm. You were good in there. You were better. I usually am. The almost smile again, I know. The bond was quiet and warm, like a room with a fire in it, like coming inside from cold. I had spent for days arguing with it. Arguing with the inconvenience of it, the audacity of it, the complete lack of consultation. I had for days of being furious at the universe for its timing and its choices and its deeply flawed matchmaking system. And I was still opposed, on principle, to the entire concept. That hadn't changed. But I was standing next to Caden Voss on a pavement in October, And he had brought me noodles at 11 p.m. and stood beside me at a table full of entrenched men. And he had said you're right like it cost him something real to say it, and then done something about it, and the pamphlet, with its meadow and its golden light, had never once mentioned that this was what it might feel like. That it might feel like to people choosing each other on top of the bond. Because of what they'd seen, not just because of what they'd smelled. Coffee, I said. He turned to look at me now. There's a place on 5th. They're open late. I started walking. Don't make it weird. It's coffee. He fell into step beside me, and I could hear the smile in his voice without looking. Just coffee. Just coffee, I confirmed. And you're paying because you drank 2/3 of my Ethiopian roast and never replaced it. That was 4 days ago. I have an excellent memory. We walked down the street together in the October cold, and the bond hummed steadily between us like something that had always been there. Like a river that had been running underground for years and had finally, inconveniently, inevitably, found the light. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Meridian Basin Ecological Recovery Initiative launched on a Tuesday. Caden stood at the podium in front of a room full of press and policy people and said the words he'd been working toward for 3 years. And I sat in the 4th row with my coffee and my crossed arms and my best approximation of professional detachment, which was, by this point, a complete fiction that I maintained mostly for the entertainment of my colleagues. My phone buzzed. You're smiling, it said. His text. Thought you didn't care about public events. I looked up. He was still at the podium, looking composed, but his eyes had found me in the 4th row with the accuracy that I had stopped being surprised by. Because the bond did that, it always knew where the other person was, like a compass that had expanded to include a second north. I typed back, I'm not smiling. I'm assessing the structural integrity of your argument. 3 dots appeared. Then, the structural integrity is fine. My scientist checked it. Your scientist has a name. Sarah Calloway, MSc, PhD candidate, the most irritating person I have ever been fated to. I looked up again. He was still talking to the room, completely composed, and his eyes were still on me, and the smile he wasn't letting his face show was entirely visible to me and only me. The bond hummed. I smiled into my coffee. The universe still owed me a refund, technically. The methodology was flawed. The pamphlet was misleading. And the whole system was biologically autocratic and completely inconsistent with personal autonomy. But the coffee was good, the work mattered, and the person across the room, the infuriating, complicated, quietly trying to do right person across the room, was looking at me like I was the one thing in his day that made sense. I put my phone away. Some scams I was willing to keep,